Yo guys, I've got a spark which I'm going to use to ignite the fire for a brand new video within Skylanders Week 2 here on the channel. It's Wednesday today, which means it's time to finally rank all of these Swap Force levels, and I know what you're thinking. There are more than 14 levels in Swap Force, and that's because whilst the game itself does classify boss fights as separate levels, I myself am not doing that because I don't think it's fair to rank a single boss fight against the might of an entire level. There just is no comparison there. It's like comparing apples to oranges, which is why I am combining the boss fight with the level that precedes it in order to create a just ranking for the entire section of the game in that regard. So now that having been said and done, once again the list is based on both factors of my nostalgia, which is what gives me more personal tethering to each level, as well as the level's overall quality when it comes down to its level design, its visuals, especially its visuals, because Swap Force is renowned for how good it looks. Vicarious Visions take a lot of care in presentations of their games, and it's incredibly apparent in Swap Force. This game is gorgeous, which is why I'm very happy to be celebrating it on this fine Wednesday evening. So without further ado, let's roll the outro and get straight into the ranking at hand. At number 14 is Cascade Glade. It doesn't help that Swap Force bunches levels together based on our particular generic theme of gaming. Every game has its jungle themed levels, desert themed levels, and ice themed levels. It makes it hard for certain levels to stand out amongst the rest of the crowd in Swap Force, and Cascade Glade is no exception. The visuals are bland and basic when compared to other gorgeous, detail-filled levels of Swap Force, and the combat isn't challenging enough either, given that it's only the second level of the game. Really, the only things of note in this level are the platforming challenges and the caves. They're pretty fun and they really reward your exploration of the level, as they're quite large and expansive. It's well designed platforming sections which take full advantage of the new jump mechanic in Swap Force. Outside of that, the level has nothing unique to help it stand out, and due to its forgetfulness, it just kind of blends in with all the other Skylanders levels of this exact same generic feeling. At number 13 is Mount Cloudbreak. The level has an identity crisis, and the lack of consistent objectives puts a huge hindrance on the pacing of this level. You don't want to start the game with long levels. I think Swap Force would have been better off if it built up to the larger levels, rather than starting with a long one, which feels much more slow paced than it actually is, because it doesn't give you much of a challenge on a combat scale. And it would be bad design otherwise. Unfortunately though, this leaves Mount Cloudbreak feeling barren and empty because of the fact that it's long with few combat sections sprinkled in between. This all comes after a safeguarding section as well, where you fight enemies on board the Dread Yacht, but it's not as intense or exciting as the level Aerial Assault from Giants. The difficulty hasn't yet been given for time to settle in, so the bare minimum behind this level is that the visuals can be quite stunning, especially in this particular portion of the level where we're inside the volcano. It really does introduce you to the gorgeous visual style that Swap Force prides itself with. I think Mount Cloudbreak is better at executing upon its purpose than Cascade Glade, even if the level is a little more boring and slow paced, which is why it barely edges out Cascade Glade on my ranking. At number 12 is Twisty Tunnels and Serpent's Peak. I think Twisty Tunnels is an exceptionally boring, slow-paced and generic desert level. You traverse over sand with pretty easy collectibles, not making your exploration feel satisfying, and you don't feel as rewarded for finding the collectibles. Even on my first go-around of this level, I found pretty much everything. What also harms this level is the fact that it comes after two fantastic desert levels, which do so much more with a desert theme. We're talking about a full-scale attack on Iron Jaw Gulch or a scrapyard made of junk. Either concept is far more invested in Twisty Tunnels on a visual scale, so if I'm to replay a desert level in this game, Twisty Tunnels is the last one I'd choose. I do enjoy the platforming challenges inside the crystals. Much like Cascade Glade, they are the highlight of the level. They add much needed fresh air from the constant combat, which doesn't make the level feel any more full. It's still just way too boring, which is what makes it so slow paced to begin with. The boss fight afterward doesn't help matters neither. You rinse and repeat the exact same thing as the patterns of attacks just get slightly harder. You still feel that sense of progression with the boss, but it's not as much as you do with other boss fights. Putting 3 fire golems in tight quarters is also ridiculously unfair, and it feels cheap, especially on harder difficulties. The whole concept of being swallowed by the fire viper and burped back out is pretty gross to me. And I just don't like the lack of creativity behind this boss, especially when other boss fights by comparison have so much more creativity put behind them. At number 11 is Mudwater Hollow. If there is one thing I hate about games, it's sections where you have set speed. Games are designed to be interacted with by the player in whichever fashion they choose. If that means blazing through a level, so be it. These raft sections bring the pace into an absolute crawl, and once again they're filled with absolute nothingness. A common complaint amongst Swap Force is how long the levels are. The problem with having long and expansive levels like this is that not every section can be exciting. Some sections are going to feel like nothing compared to others, and that's exactly what we have with the raft sections in this level, where you have the occasional mine to dodge and that's about it. Plus the hitboxes is extremely large and unfair, so half of the time I don't even feel motivated enough to bother dodging the mines, unless I'm on a higher difficulty where I often lose Skylanders to absolute cheapness, and boy, it is infuriating. Sections like this are clearly just used to pad out the length of the level so it's similar in length to the rest, and it really brings you out of the investment you're currently enduring. The rest of the level is fine, the village is expansive and it really does reward your exploration of it. Combat is starting to get tough and more frequent, plus the music really adds to the fishing theme, which stands out more amongst other levels in Swap Force for its uniqueness. But even these highlights aren't really anything to write home about, and they don't reach nearly the same heights as the other levels do throughout this game, hence why Mudwater Hollow gets number 11 on my ranking. Kicking off the top 10 already, at number 10 is going to be Winter Keep. I like the idea of joining forces with the resistance that the Frost Elves are putting up against the evil Snow Cyclopses. It's an underdog story I can really root for. Snow Caliber is also a really clever and creative pun. You truly feel worthy when wielding it, mostly because, well, the Frost Elf says so, but still, I do think it takes a little too much time to shovel up the piles of snow, especially since you have to stop all of your moving, which does bring the pace into an absolute crawl because it's jarring to go from having momentum to having none whatsoever as you dig. The level also features way too many long corridors and not enough exploration. Once again, I found too many of the collectibles too easily in my first playthrough, but I love what they did with Stink Bomb's Soul Gem. You not only need to locate where the Soul Gem is, but you need to figure out a way to reach it, which involves platforming. Aesthetically, it's really neat when the level is plunged into darkness as a result of the Illuminator furnace being frozen. It highly contrasts what you're accustomed to, and it really helps set the tone as the elves begin to lose hope. But then you restore that hope and it makes you feel powerful. It's an incredibly satisfying level to beat, but it's a little too long and it's not really executed to perfection, as too many sections are linear without enough exploration. And the ice theme isn't as creatively twisted in this one as it is the other ice themed levels in this game. It makes this one more forgettable by comparison, and the rainbow grinding sections also bring the pace into an absolute crawl, much like the digging sections. Having a consistent slow pace is one thing for your level, but an inconsistent pace is another problem altogether, hence why we're given Winter Keep the number 10 spot on this list. Number 9 is going to be probably the shortest level in the game, Iron Jaw Gulch, and with it being short, it means that it feels far less barren most of the time, so it's fast paced as you quickly find yourself making your way to the end. Plus, I love the twist in this level, which I've mentioned already. It takes you to a traditional desert setting for sure, but I like the idea of putting a stop to this all-out invasion that Chaos is conducting as you head through a western-styled town populated by law enforcement sharks. Yeah, it certainly is a western theme. It reminds me of old-school western films, actually, and it's neatly executed with clever gags along the way. It's not an empty level neither, with mines and platforming to worry about whenever you're not fighting enemies. Some collectibles are nicely hidden away, especially soul gems, but everything else isn't as tough and rewarding as I'd have liked. The level just has an outstanding attention to detail, such as the bounties on Chaos, again just like a traditional western setting. There are other desert themed levels in Swap Force, but none of them play into the tropes of the western genre nearly as much, and it's a welcome change of scenery getting to see such creativity poured into the background details of this level. And plus I also love the length of this level. It's perfect as no section feels longer than it needs to be, as I was alluding to earlier, and that makes this easily one of the most fast-paced levels of the entire game. It just needed a little more to stand out, and it needed to hit the highs other levels in this game are capable of. By comparison, I feel as though number 9 is the perfect spot for Iron Jaw Gulch on my ranking. But number 8 is going to be Boney Islands. The ice theme may seem generic at first, but they do a great job with said theming, because we're talking about a frozen museum leading to very interesting visual gags that are very pleasing to the eyes. Plus the background detail, it really does immerse you into the level, because we get to see a side to Skylands not usually explored, that being Skylands tourism. A very cool thing to get to see a glimpse into indeed, and it helps the level stand out. The puzzles here are unique, as ice makes blocks slide when you push them, add an extra thought when attempting puzzles, as this means you need to think extra hard, especially when you contrast one ice-based puzzle with a normal puzzle where the blocks no longer slide. The level is more explorable than previous levels we've looked at, much like museums in real life actually, and I find that you can rarely take in everything from a single museum on the first go around, so in order to truly soak everything in, you need to visit the museum multiple times. Transporting the caravan does feel like a slog, however, and its inconveniences which lengthen the level, and that just feels contrived and it's a little frustrating, I must admit. The turret sections also aren't my favourite. You don't feel the same sense of control as you do in other turret sections in other Skylanders games, because the pace is constant. You're moving forward with the caravan as you aren't allowed to go at your own pace. It demands quick reaction times, which does keep you hooked on the level, I must admit, by the pure chaos alone, but it would be nice to be able to move at your own pace and build up your own momentum. In other words, I leave the turret sections feeling mixed about it every time, but one thing is for sure is that it does bring about an anticlimactic ending to the level. For me, in my personal opinion, I'd rather the level not end on a turret section. Coming in at number 7 is Rampant Ruins and the Rumble in the Jungle. This level is so memorable that everybody calls it by the correct name, Rampart Ruins, rather than Rampant Ruins, including myself, apparently. Moving on, this level is the first real shred of creativity we get within the game. It's an Archean graveyard leading to interesting visuals that really help the gloomy atmosphere dawn on you. It helps that it's accompanied by an incredible soundtrack. You traverse this level with such fear as you're worried about how these Archeans were brought to extinction in the first place. What could have brought down such titans? What still lurks around every corner? Feeling as though every step could be your last really invests you into the level. But besides a well-crafted atmosphere and detailed background elements with contrasting reds and yellows which really pop in an eye-pleasing manner, we also have the balance of hazards, exploration and combat within this level. Collectibles are cleverly tucked away and it's rewarding every single time to find them. Combat is tough and appears frequently enough throughout the level where you don't feel bombarded all at once by it, but it never loses you long enough to make you feel bored, and the level never really feels empty, especially with that atmosphere that's constantly looming. And then there's also hazards to avoid between combat scenarios. So again, the level never gets boring, it never gets slow paced, and it always feels full. Combat is all the more intense and rewards your progression throughout the level as you learn how the enemies work, and Evil Glumshake starts firing rockets at you on top of the combat, so now you have more than just the enemies to avoid, making the final fight the culmination of everything learned throughout the level. It's a very satisfying progression indeed as things become intense and memorable. Evil Glumshakes also has an excellent boss fight. You're hooked from the moment the boss begins because Glumshakes has such charm behind his personality, and the boss fight escalates in difficulty at a pace you can comprehend. It's simple enough to figure out how to fight him, so the game doesn't need to hold your hand whilst doing it. Of course, it's not as challenging as other boss fights later in the game, but it's still perfectly enjoyable. Coming in at number 6 is Shipwreck Islands. The scenery in this one is a little too similar to the deserts we've seen already. I'd have liked a different theme, but the detailed backgrounds we've become accustomed to in Swap Force are still present, with sheep temples that possess awesome sheep embodiments within the unique architecture designs. The level itself is also pretty well designed. It flows well as each challenge leads to the next and the difficulty gets progressive. We're simply introduced to the tornado gimmick at first, then it starts to become more intricate and challenging as the level goes on. Whilst teleporting, you aren't actually playing the game. This does mean that these sections can become a little long and get boring after a while, but luckily they don't really exceed their welcome too frequently. but it does lead to collectibles simply being found in a far off tornado. It's not particularly challenging, leading to little reward when actually exploring the level. The tornado gimmick even makes its way to enemies with the Vortex Gear Golem, which adds an extra layer of depth and intensity to the fights. It all culminates in a satisfying but ultimately way too long arena battle. The level mainly has its strengths, but a few weaknesses do pour in here and there, especially for poorly hidden and easy to gather collectibles, dragging the whole level down to number 6 on my ranking list. Number 5 is Chaos's Fortress and Motherly Mayhem / Super Evil Chaos. Chaos's Fortress has a cool gimmick with goop that needs to be avoided. It punishes you for unsuccessful platforming, making every portion of the level a challenge. The intensity of it keeps you hooked and it's very fast paced, especially sections where you can't stay still because the goop begins to rise. It leaves you with only the moment where you're flying on that hovercraft to take a breather. The marathon style behind it makes it all the more satisfying when you're finally victorious and make it to the end. I just like that Chaos has this obsession with goop. It makes sense for his character, and it's odd it's never really been done before in a Skylanders game. The visuals are unfortunately a little lackluster, as there is little to the background detail, and the only thing contrasting the dull blacks and greys is the green from the goop itself. Even then the colours don't really pop, but it does do a great job setting tone and atmosphere of the level. You're truly in the most dangerous area in Skylands, as you're behind enemy lines, and the level doesn't let you forget it for a moment, so you're truly fearful, as you should be. Plus, Softpaw is a really fun and energetic NPC you look forward to meeting up with at certain points in the level. This leads to Chaosandra, who has a really unique and memorable boss fight gimmick where she hides inside the portal and you must take your Skylander off to find her. This gimmick blew my mind when I first figured it out. In fact, it took me way too long to actually figure it out for the first time around. I had no idea how the developers did such a clever trick. This gimmick distracts you from what is otherwise a generic and boring boss battle where you just traverse a long and straight corridor with no exploration and only a few hazards, only to fight an onslaught of enemies in an arena. Enemies you've fought already and you know how to deal with them already. It gives the subversion that this is a test of everything you've learnt so far, meaning that it feels a little too final, and that makes this final twist boss all the more surprising. Super Evil Chaos is obviously the final boss in the game rather than Chaosandra, but the problem is that I hate this boss. First of all, the boss is pretty disgusting. You have to attack toes from the feet, then you have to attack Chaos's brain and his head. He stomps you, beats you, burps you out. For me personally, it's not very appealing. Plus, all you do is jump over shockwaves, defeat enemies, then attack the crystals, same as literally every other boss and enemy encounter leading up to this. The ending is very anticlimactic as well. Chaos tries to blast you, where you must stop and start again to get past his laser, putting a massive hindrance on the pacing of the final boss. It's a good thing I don't rank bosses separately, because this boss is so boring, anticlimactic, gross, and mean-spirited that it would have probably got the very bottom slot. Luckily, the level and Chaosandra's boss fight beforehand are more than enough to balance out this monstrosity and raise the trio much higher on the list. Number 4 is Phantasm Forest. Okay, let's get the floor of the level out of the way immediately. We all know the dragged out firefighting sequences and just how annoying and cheap the off-screen missiles are, how that all culminates in something very anticlimactic, especially for the boss fight at the very end where you defeat Chaos essentially in a firefight. So these sections are beyond slow pace, in fact that's putting it mildly, and the entire level as such becomes dragged out, and it's really annoying to replay because these sequences really are just the same thing over and over again. The repetition here is dull, rather than putting an emphasis on the very thing it is repeating, because all it really does is put an emphasis on the themes of the level, which, to be fair, are impressive in and of itself. You need to really work to accomplish anything, making any victory, big or small, feel significant. And it's a very clever level design as we go through and then have to peel off and find tools to get past the fire, which is really colourful in and of itself. The fire has tints of pink, blue and green inside it, and those contrasts are visually pleasing as the colours really pop on screen before you. So again, it's a very well crafted level, there's no denying that, which is why it's all the way up here at number 4. The enemies even provide a tough and intense challenge which invests you further into the level. You constantly have hazards to dodge and enemies to fight. Makes sense when there's a forest on fire, so no part of the level feels unnecessary, well, besides the firefighting sequences, but even then, if the problem is that they feel too long, not that they feel unnecessary, as it is the theme of the entire level. And the level feels full, there is never any empty feeling moment. The detail in this level is astounding, and I love the contrast between the greens and the browns. It looks gorgeous. The fire being purple and red makes it more visually distinctive and memorable than typical fire, as I alluded to earlier, and it does make the fire seem that much more dangerous. This level does intimidate you with a constant threat of the fire, as it can easily spread throughout a forest. So overall, this level just has more creativity and passion poured into it. It even has some clever gags, with the story score pointing out the fact that tree men made of wood fighting fire is a really stupid idea. Yet they go on ahead and do it anyway. So this level really does feature better level design than other levels on this list so far, which is why it has earned 4th place despite its glaring issues. I also love the fact that the story scroll I alluded to earlier in Phantasm Forest is incredibly hard to find, so the collectibles in Phantasm Forest are something to write home about given their difficulty and the need for exploration, though again it can lead to very frustrating replays of the level. Without further ado though, we're going to move on to number 3, which is Frostfest Mountains and Mesmerelda. This level is really clever as to how it guides you. You follow the light and make your way through a thick blizzard. Because of this, there isn't really many of the great background details I love so much from the other levels in Swap Force, but this level makes up for it with plenty of new gameplay mechanics to constantly shift up the gameplay loop and ensure that you're never bored when playing this level. You'll jump from hazard avoidance to exploration to combat to platforming and back again at a moment's notice. Things are never given enough time to become stale, and a side mission where you complete volcano games has a depth to it not regularly seen in side content. They're really fun minigames and they're incorporated well into the level so that everything flows and nothing throws off your pacing. The level is also shorter than most in Swap Force, which is why nothing ever overextends its welcome. Then the Mesmerelda boss fight at the end is simply cherry atop the cake because it's incredibly fun. Mesmerelda's singing brings the boss fight a lot of uniqueness and personality, and it even adds to the memorability factor of the boss in the first place, as it's a boss focused mostly around dodging attacks, which is really cool, and your reaction skills and timing are what's rewarded here rather than just your straight up combat expertise. It's a very fast paced and creative boss, making it easily the best boss the whole of Swap Force has to offer. But our runner-up coming in at number 2 is Tower of Time. Just like Dark Light Crypt, this adventure pack level is one of the highlights of its respective game. This level introduced a new mechanic with its time stopping capabilities, and it plays around with this mechanic to a very large extent, meaning that it asks you for increasingly intricate and difficult tasks revolving around this mechanic, and the progression in this level always feels fair and organic. Some sections are a little too long and it can result in a slower pace for the level at times, but the gorgeous visuals distract you enough, and the level is full to the brim with different things to do that will keep you engaged. I love that it doesn't just use its time stop mechanics in a basic fashion. There is some really good level design here, and I admire the passion poured into a level which not all players will even get to experience. But the easy number 1 spot for me has to be Motleyville. We're introduced to a great NPC known as Sharpfin with their already benefits for level, but on top of that, the level has style and such creativity poured into it. It's a chase level at its core as you follow Baron von Shellshock through a junkyard. How different pieces of scrap metal come together to form the level is very creative and intricately detailed. You constantly loop around the level to find things to give you access to previously blocked off areas. It's beyond clever level design, and this level even features 2 boss fights, making it a marathon of a level that never ceases on the tension and the excitement you feel. It's a truly atmospheric and intense level that keeps you hooked from beginning to end. Plus, it makes the ending feel all the more satisfying when you're victorious. The landscape itself in this level has character, and it's more investing to me than any other Swap Force level. Plus, some of the collectible placements are pure genius. They're incredibly well hidden, but never too absurd where you feel cheated for missing something. Every nook and cranny here has its detail, and I adore the level for it, which is why I can't think of a single Swap Force level more worthy of the number 1 spot on this list. I cannot, in good conscience, end off this video without first thanking all of my incredible channel members whose continued support help make these videos possible. Without them, these videos would be near impossible to make, so from the bottom of my heart, I truly appreciate every last one of them. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, there are plenty of options on screen now to explore, and please consider subscribing to keep up to date with all my content. On that note, this video is coming to an end, so thank you so much as always for watching. Until the next video arises, peace!